You step out of your truck, close the door with a firm click, and walk to the edge of a field you are thinking of buying. The air smells of sweet clover and damp earth after a morning shower. The grass is a rich, vibrant green. A row of ancient oaks frames the northern boundary, and the view of the valley below is enough to make a man stop and draw a deep breath. You are already imagining where the kitchen window will look out, where the barn will stand. In the modern world, the common practice is to immediately start calling specialists. People will tell you to hire a soil engineer, an environmental consultant, and a real estate attorney, spending thousands of dollars just to evaluate the place before you even know if the dirt is worth a dime. They tell you that without a team of experts and a stack of expensive reports, you are walking blind. Stop and think about that. Why should a man have to spend a small fortune just to know if a piece of dirt is honest? Our grandfathers didn't have teams of engineers or digital mapping tools. Yet, they built farms that lasted for generations, picking ground that fed their families and stood firm through every storm. Today, I am going to show you a simple, forgotten approach that costs nothing. It is a way to look at a piece of ground that takes about 60 seconds on your first pass. Yet it will tell you more about the true value of that land than a dozen glossy brochures from a land agent. Once you see land this way, you will wonder why anyone pays for complicated assessments before doing the basic work themselves. My name is Elias Yoder. I am Amish, and I farm here in Lancaster County. My grandfather taught me how to look at a piece of ground before you ever think about signing your name to a contract. The same way his grandfather taught him. It is a knowledge passed down by walking fields with someone older who points at the things that matter and ignores the things that do not. I have seen bad things happen to good people in this county. I have watched English friends from the city who came out here looking for a clean break, a place to start fresh and build a self-sufficient life. They drove past a for sale sign on a warm Sunday afternoon, fell deep in love with the view, and signed papers a week later. Only then did they learn that the heavy clay beneath the grass would not drain, turning into a slick gray gumbo that would not support a septic system. Or they found out there was no legal way to put a driveway across the neighbor's strip of woods, or that the beautiful flat spot they picked for their cabin sat right in an ancient flood path. By then, the trap had sprung. They were standing on land that was eating their life savings whole. The wrong piece of ground will sink your entire plan before you even lay the first stone of your foundation. Now, understand this clearly. What I am sharing with you today is a master practitioner's tool, a traditional method tested by centuries of rural living. It is a filter to protect you from the costliest mistakes. But let us be entirely honest about what it can and cannot do. This 60-second check works wonderfully for raw country land, old homesteads, and small farm plots. It will not find hidden environmental toxins buried deep underground by an old factory, and it will not replace the final, precise boundary survey that your local bank or title company will require before closing. It is the first line of defense, the old farmer's screen. If a piece of ground fails here, you walk away, and you haven't lost a single penny. Why do folks look at a piece of country land today the same way they look at a house in a suburban development? In the town, everything is already worked out for you. The streets are paved, the water flows from a city pipe, and the waste disappears down a sewer line. But out here, the ground is the thing. The view will fade from your mind, and the price will become a memory. But the ground will either cooperate with your labor, or it will fight you at every single turn. The old people knew this because their survival depended on it. Modern science now uses complex terminology like percolation rates to explain these things. But understand this: they are only giving new expensive names to the exact same natural laws our ancestors read like an open book. There are 6 things to check when you look at land. Just 6. They are access, soil, slope, water, the view from the road, and the wider circle of what surrounds the property. If you learn them, you can stand at the fence line, Or even sit at your kitchen table looking at a map and tell almost instantly whether the ground is good or bad. It is a step-by-step revelation of the land's true character. You begin to notice the subtle textures of the earth, the way the ground feels soft and spongy under your boot, even during a dry spell, the specific hiss of wind through a stand of trees that signals a steep ridge, or the heavy, sour smell of stagnant water trapped in a low pocket where the clay is thick as lard. The very first check, the one that stands at the gate of the entire list, is access. It sounds so simple it is almost silly to say it aloud. Yet it is the single most common trap that destroys first-time buyers. Most folks look at a map and see a line touching a road, and they assume they can get to their land. They do not realize that access has two completely different parts: a physical reality and a legal reality. And if either one is missing, your land is nothing more than a landlocked prison for your savings. I am standing right here at the edge of an old public road, looking at a strip of land that looks absolutely perfect. Let me show you precisely what happens when you perform this first check, how to read the hidden language of the deed, and how to spot the physical barrier that the land seller hopes you will drive right past. We begin right here at the property gate, where the lane meets the asphalt. To check physical access, you do not just look at where a car can drive today. You look at the shape of the approach. Walk down into the road ditch. Look for a culvert pipe, that tube of corrugated steel or concrete that lets the road water pass under the driveway. If it is crushed, rusted through, or missing entirely, the county will eventually make you tear it out and put a proper one in. That requires permits, a backhoe rental, and several tons of clean crushed limestone. It is a hidden cost before you even set foot on the property. Now, for the legal part, you must take the paper deed, the legal document that describes who owns what, and you look at the section marked Description or Reservations. A common beginner mistake is accepting a seller's word that the lane has always been used by this proper. A tire track on grass is not a legal right. You are looking for specific words, together with a perpetual, non-exclusive easement for ingress and egress over and across, followed by a precise description of the neighbor's land. If those words are not stamped and recorded with a book and page number from the county courthouse, you do not have a driveway. You have a lawsuit waiting to happen. Once you are satisfied with the gate, you walk into the field to check the second thing, the soil. Do not let your eyes be fooled by a thick carpet of green grass. Grass is a shallow creature. It will grow beautifully on 3 inches of soil over solid limestone or a buried trash dump. To know what is truly happening underneath, you need an old iron spade with a clean, sharp edge. Walk to the center of the spot where you think you want to build your home. Dig a square hole, 2 feet deep and 1 foot wide. As you dig, stop and look at the changing colors of the earth. The top few inches will be dark brown, rich with old leaves and root matter. That is your topsoil, and it is fine for a garden, but it tells you nothing about your septic system. Look below that, into the subsoil. If the earth down there turns a pale, dull gray or a mottled bluish color, stop and think about what that means. In nature, gray and blue in the subsoil mean one thing: suffocation. It means water sits in that dirt so long that no oxygen can get in, rotting the minerals and turning the soil sour. If you grab a handful of that subsoil and squeeze it, notice the consistency. If it molds into a tight, slick ball that feels like cold modeling clay or wet bread dough, and it leaves a greasy sheen on your palm, that is heavy clay. It is what old-timers call gumbo. It will hold water like a stone jug. If you pour a 5-gallon bucket of water into that hole, and it is still sitting there the next morning, staring back at you like a dull, muddy eye, that soil is dead to a septic system. Now, contrast that with good, honest ground. When you dig down 2 feet in good soil, the subsoil will be a warm, deep yellowish brown or a bright brick red. When you squeeze a handful of it, it will hold its shape for a second. But the moment you poke it with your thumb, it crumbles apart like dry cornmeal or coarse cake crumbs. It feels gritty to the touch, not greasy. When you lift it to your nose, it smells sweet and clean, like the floor of a hardwood forest after a gentle spring rain. If you pour your bucket of water into a hole dug in this kind of ground, you can watch the level drop right before your eyes, disappearing into the earth within an hour or two. That soil breathes. That soil will take a septic system without an expensive engineered mound, saving you $15,000 on your build. The third check is the slope, and you can measure this accurately without a $1,000 surveyor's transit. All you need is 100 feet of clear plastic garden hose, a bucket of water, and a helper. Water is an honest thing. It finds its own level perfectly, every single time, without fail. You fill that clear hose with water, leaving a few inches of air at each end. Your helper holds one end at the high spot where the house will sit, touching the ground. You walk 50 feet down the hill with the other end. When the water stops moving inside the plastic tube, you hold your end up until the water line matches the level at your helper's end. Then, you measure the distance from your end of the water line straight down to the grass with a simple tape measure. If that distance is more than 5 feet over a 50-foot stretch, you have a 10% slope. Understand this about slope. A little roll to the land is a beautiful blessing because it keeps rainwater from pooling around your foundation. But a common mistake beginners make is falling in love with a steep hillside because of the view, thinking they will just build a walkout basement. They do not realize that every degree of slope increases the cost of everything that touches the ground. The concrete truck cannot safely back up a steep, muddy grade. You will have to pay for a specialized pump truck to hose the concrete up the hill from the road. The driveway will require deep cuts into the bank, limestone retaining walls to keep the hill from sliding onto your gravel, and heavy culverts to redirect the rushing runoff. If you wouldn't feel comfortable pushing a heavy wooden wheelbarrow straight up that incline, remember that every machine and every delivery truck will fight that same battle, and you will pay for their struggle by the hour. The fourth check is water. And the secret to this check is knowing how to read the land when the sun is shining and everything looks dry. Nature always leaves a record of where water spends its time. You just have to know how to read the alphabet. Look closely at the plants growing in the low dips of the field. If you see wild irises, ferns, or thick coarse clumps of sedge grass that look like dark green pincushions sticking out of the lawn, that ground is a wetland, regardless of how dry it feels under your boot today. Walk over to the trees near the low areas. Look at the bark on the trunks of the older oaks or maples. If you see a distinct horizontal line where the dark moss suddenly stops, or a faint, gray coating of dried silt clinging to the bark 2 feet above the ground, you are looking at a high water mark. That creek, which looks like a pretty little trickle today, becomes a roaring wall of water when the spring snow melts or a late summer thunderstorm dumps 3 inches of rain in an hour. If your chosen building spot sits below that moss line, you are building your home in a riverbed that is merely sleeping. Always check the ground when it is at its worst. Walk the land during a heavy driving rainstorm, not on the beautiful Sunday afternoon when the seller is holding an open house. Now, you might listen to these old ways and think they are just old wives' tales or folklore from a time before people understood how the world really works. But stop and think about it. The old people didn't invent these rules of thin air. They gathered them over hundreds of years by watching what worked and what failed. What my grandfather taught me by the edge of a ditch is the exact same truth that the agricultural scientists at the big universities teach today. They just use different words for it. When we look at the color of the subsoil or measure the slope with a garden hose, we are relying on deep, unchanging laws of nature. Laws of chemistry and physics that never lie. Even when a land advertisement does, take the color of that subsoil you dug up with your spade. The university professors call that process reduction and oxidation, but you can understand it easily by thinking of a common iron nail. If you leave a clean iron nail sitting on a shelf in your workshop where the air is dry and moving, it will slowly take oxygen from the air and turn a bright, crusty reddish brown. It rusts. That is oxidation. The exact same thing happens deep inside honest, well-drained ground. Because the soil is porous, air can move down into the earth. The iron minerals naturally sleeping in the dirt combine with that oxygen and turn the subsoil those beautiful, warm shades of brick red, orange, and bright yellowish brown. It is the color of an earth that can breathe. But what happens if you throw that same iron nail into the bottom of a stagnant rain barrel and leave it there under feet of heavy water? The oxygen cannot get to it. Instead, anaerobic bacteria, tiny living creatures that thrive where there is no air, go to work. They strip the oxygen away, and the iron turns a dull, dark slate gray or a sickly, mottled blue. That is what the scientists call reduction. And it is the exact same thing happening in that greasy, gray clay at the bottom of a bad test hole. When you see gray or blue mottled dirt, you are looking at soil that has been drowned and suffocated for months at a time, usually every winter and spring. The water sits there because the physical structure of the soil prevents it from escaping. Understand this structure through a simple analogy from the kitchen table. Think of well-drained, sandy loam as a glass jar filled to the brim with marbles. Even though the jar is full, there are large open spaces between every single marble. If you pour water into the top of that jar, it will rush straight down through those spaces and pool at the bottom instantly. That is how sand and gravel behave. Now, think of heavy clay. Instead of marbles, imagine taking 1,000 flat ceramic dinner plates and stacking them tightly one on top of the other. The total amount of solid material might be the same, but the spaces between those plates are microscopic. If you pour water onto the top of that stack of plates, it cannot rush down. It gets trapped by capillary action, clinging to the flat surfaces, moving sideways if it moves at all, but mostly just sitting there, choking out the air. The garden hose we use to check the slope works on another absolute law of physics. Hydrostatic pressure. Water is heavy, and gravity pulls down on it with an identical force at every point on the earth. When you put water inside a tube, the weight of the water at one end will push against the water at the other end until the surface of the water at both openings sits at the exact same distance from the center of the earth. It does not matter if the middle of the hose is twisted around a tree trunk, dropped into a ditch, or stepped on by a cow. The two ends will always show you a perfectly flat, level line. It is a tool that cannot be cheated by an uneven hillside or an optical illusion. But I must be entirely honest with you about the boundaries of these traditional methods. Every tool has its limits, and if you try to use an old farmer's check outside of the conditions where it belongs, you will end up just as misled as the city folks who bought the swamp on a Sunday afternoon. First, understand that this check is designed for native, undisturbed country ground. It works beautifully on fields, woods, pastures, and old homesteads. It does not work on what the builders call made ground or artificial fill. If you are looking at a piece of land near a town or an old industrial area, a previous owner might have hauled in 10 feet of broken concrete, old brick shale, and scraped topsoil to level out a swampy ravine 20 years ago. If you dig your 2-foot hole there, you might find loose, gravelly material that looks like it drains wonderfully. But 3 feet further down, beneath that stolen fill, sits the original hardpan clay layer. Your septic system will drain through the top layer, hit that hidden clay shelf, and back up into your yard anyway. Second, you cannot rely entirely on these visual checks during a severe summer drought. Heavy clay soil has a peculiar characteristic known as shrink-swell behavior. When a clay field goes 2 months without a drop of rain under a hot July sun, the moisture is baked right out of those tightly stacked plates. The clay shrinks, and the ground cracks open, sometimes leaving fissures 2 inches wide that go down 3 or 4 feet deep. If you walk that land in the middle of a drought and pour a bucket of water into your test hole, The water will fall straight down into those deep cracks and disappear in 30 seconds. A beginner will smile and think he has found perfect, well-drained soil. But the moment the autumn rains return, that clay will drink the water, swell back up like a wet sponge, seal every one of those cracks completely, and turn right back into an impermeable stone basin. Third, this method cannot see the invisible dangers that do not leave a mark on the soil color or the plant life. It will not show you if the ground is resting on a dangerous limestone formation known as karst topography, where hidden underground caverns can collapse without warning and create a sinkhole beneath your barn. It will not smell or show the color of lead arsenate pesticides left behind in the dirt from an old commercial orchard that stood on the place 80 years ago. It will not tell you if there is a silent plume of old chemical solvent creeping through the deep groundwater from a machine shop a mile down the road. And it will not show you the colorless, odorless radon gas that rises naturally out of certain deep granite formations. The old ways are your first line of defense to screen out the obviously bad ground before you waste time and money. They tell you when to walk away instantly. But if a piece of land passes all of these checks, that is the exact moment you stop doing it alone and bring in the modern technical tools to confirm what the earth has told you. These 6 checks are not a new invention, nor a secret formula belonging to me. They have a quiet pedigree stretching back through generations of people who worked the ground with their bare hands. When my ancestors crossed the Atlantic in the early 1700s to settle here in Pennsylvania, they brought nothing but a few iron tools, a pouch of seeds, and a deep understanding of how to read the earth. They could not afford to make a mistake. If a pioneer signed his name to a piece of ground that would not drain or could not be reached by a wagon, his family would simply not survive the winter. There were no government safety nets or bank refunds for bad decisions back then. You lived by the honesty of your ground, or you starved by its refusal. When those early Mennonite and Amish families first walked the unbroken forests of Lancaster County in the 1710s, they looked for specific signs that the earth was good. They looked at the oldest residents of the land, the trees. They sought massive groves of black walnut, white oak, and shellbark hickory. They knew from ancient experience that these trees only grow where the topsoil is deep, the lime is rich, and the subsoil drains perfectly, so the deep roots never sit in stagnant water. If they saw a piece of land covered in stunted red maples and thick mats of moss, they didn't care how beautiful the view was from the ridge. They turned their horses around and kept walking. They were reading the exact same 6 checks we discussed today, using the tools nature provided right before their eyes. 2,000 years ago, Roman agricultural writers like Cato and Columella wrote detailed manuals for buying an estate. They told the buyer to never trust the appearance of the surface. Columella wrote that a man must dig a deep pit into the earth and examine the color and texture of the subsoil. He instructed readers to take a handful of that deep earth, mix it with water in an earthenware vessel, and taste it to see if it was bitter or sweet, and to squeeze it to see if it stuck to the fingers like pitch or crumbled away like dry bread. For thousands of years, across different continents and languages, the rules for finding honest ground have never changed. In our modern era, the scientific world has caught up to what old farmers always knew by instinct, putting these truths into official documents. In 1899, the United States Department of Agriculture established its first division of soils to systematically map the country. As those early government surveyors walked the fields on horseback, they realized they couldn't just guess at what lay beneath the surface. In 1937, the USDA Bureau of Chemistry and Soils released its first official guide for soil horizon identification. Inside those early pages, and in the extensive soil survey manuals that followed, the government's top scientists officially codified what my grandfather taught me by the edge of a muddy lane. They noted that soil color is the single most reliable field indicator of a property's hydrology and drainage capacity. Files.isric.org. Gisho 1 by the mid-1940s. National soil committees officially established the taxonomy for what they called glide or redoxymorphic soils. Scientists simply used expensive words to explain why a nail rusts in the air and rots in a rain barrel. They introduced highly precise color systems, like the Munsell soil color charts, which modern soil scientists still carry into the field to measure the exact value and chroma of the earth. When a certified health inspector comes out to do a modern percolation test on your property, he opens a little booklet of colored paper chips and holds them up against the dirt from your hole. If the dirt matches the dull gray or blue chips, the government issues a piece of paper saying the land is legally unfit for a home. The modern state brings a mountain of bureaucracy and technical charts to the table, but the final verdict is exactly the same one an old farmer reaches, with a sharp iron spade in 60 seconds. Canadian Science Publishing, the Pennsylvania State College Agricultural Experiments Station, spent nearly a century publishing research bulletins confirming these exact boundaries. In their annual reports throughout the 20th century, their agronomists proved that the depth at which gray mottling appears in the subsoil predicts with near-perfect accuracy how many minutes it will take for water to drop during a heavy rainstorm. They showed that heavy clay structures physically lock up water through capillary forces, rendering traditional septic systems completely useless. It is all there, recorded in thousands of pages of official scientific data, filed away in university libraries and government archives. The modern world has tested old knowledge under microscopes and in laboratories, and every single time the science has looked back at the traditional farmer and said, "You were right all along." Understand this. This knowledge does not belong to real estate companies or university professors. It belongs to any ordinary soul who has the courage to slow down and use their own two hands. Do not let this just be a pleasant story. Put it to work. Take a simple index card, write down those 6 words: access, soil, slope, water, road view, wider view, and keep it in your pocket. This weekend, go out to a local park or a piece of woods with a sharp spade. Dig a hole 2 feet deep. Squeeze the earth between your fingers. Feel the grit of sand or the slick grease of clay. Smell it. When you do this, you stop being a spectator and join an honorable tradition of self-sufficiency. The ground is completely honest. It has no desire to trick you. Learn its language, and it will protect you from the traps of the modern marketplace, giving you a firm foundation for a truly free life. Until next time, walk the ground, check the 6, and remember that the old ways are still the truest ways we have.